A couple of my friends who've recently been playing Dark Souls have had a bit of trouble fighting the skeletons at the start. Now, both of them started as a warrior, and so I thought I'd just give a quick example of how I ended up managing to defeat them quite early on, when I didn't actually notice the path to the Undead Burg. So this video is dedicated to them. Now, first of all, a lot of people come this way since it seems like the most obvious path. Now, one thing that you'll notice is using a sword deals very little damage to them. Even when dual wielding, you do about 23 damage at the most. How do you combat this? Simple. Use a different weapon. Now, there's a weapon quite useful for actually dealing with the skeletons quite early on. If you go past Petrus and drop down through the elevator shaft, you get to these chests, in one of which is the Morning Star. Now, the Morning Star is a strike weapon as opposed to a slashing weapon, and when used against skeletons you can see it does significantly more damage, and the two-handed strong attack actually knocks them completely down as opposed to only partially. This gives you more time to knock the other one down before the next one stands up. These ones at the edge are much more easy to deal with because you can knock the first one straight off, leaving you with only one to fight. Once he is down, you can either collect the item or collect it before whilst they're still forming. Once you've got that item, you don't technically have to deal with them again, unless you really want to. Or if you fall off the edge of the other one. Now, most of the skeletons come in pairs, and so once you've dealt with them with one pair, you can normally repeat that. However, there are these giant skeletons, which pack quite a punch if they hit. However, they can also be dealt with quite easily, since there's only two of them. One is this one, and the other one you'll see in a moment. They get knocked down completely by your strong attack still, and you can get another hit before they reform. That's happened a few times. Now, this is the one awkward set of skeletons, since you get 3 ordinary skeletons, one of which has a larger sword, and 1 giant skeleton. Now, I have dealt with all of them at once before, however, I'm not going to recommend that at all, since it used up most of my Estus when I did manage it, and it was pretty pointless considering that. I also fell down at this point and got completely swarmed by another 2 skeletons, which I didn't deal with initially. Those 3 skeletons and the giant skeleton don't have to be dealt with again either once you've got the items by it, unless once again you really want to. With the first set of skeletons, you can also backstab one of them should you move slowly around them and before they reform, and then slowly approach it from behind. Now, just a quick comparison of damage between the sword and the Morning Star. As you can see, it barely does any damage with 11 as its normal, and about 24 at its strongest point. Whilst with the mace, the normal attack still does quite a low amount with 17. However, the final two-handed strong attack is 60 plus, which deals more damage than a riposte with the longsword in one hand. So, that helps a lot with dealing with them, and I probably wouldn't have been able to got through them so early on initially without the Morning Star. Now, this isn't really necessary for the video, but it was just an example of how you can still take on 3 skeletons at once, although I really wouldn't recommend taking on more than 3, since they already can insta-kill you if they all attack you at once and you don't manage to block and stagger. Finally, I recommend, if you are going to deal with these coming from this side, since if you go in carefully, as opposed to rushing to get the Zweihander, you can deal one at a time. Although once you've dealt with this giant one and the first skeleton, you can probably manage against the other 2, just as you do with any other. Apart from the Zweihander, there's one more item which you can get past those skeletons, which is the binoculars, which isn't particularly useful as an item in-game, but it does allow you to have a look around. Which leads on to the Catacombs, where you'll notice pretty early on, once you fight the first skeleton, that they're slightly different from the others, since once you've killed them, they reform again. So, there's 2 ways to deal with them. The early ones you can just knock off into the into this pit here, and whilst you won't get the soul since they'll still be respawning, they aren't able to get back up to fight you. This is the route I recommend for getting through the Catacombs if you don't want to fight any of the skeletons. Although do note that if you're not fast enough or not careful enough, the skeleton that you first would have encountered right at the end may follow you down, so just a note on that. Now, either you use a divine weapon, which can kill them, or you have to more or less rush through whilst trying to avoid the skeletons until you find one of these charming looking fellows, the Necromancer. Now, once the Necromancer's dead, the skeletons will stop respawning, so it is important to focus on them if you don't have a divine weapon, since even if you die, once you killed him, they don't respawn, so the skeletons won't respawn either once you come back. So although I died, now that I'm back at the Catacombs, I can rest easier, since these skeletons can actually die now. The 2 ways you know that a skeleton has actually died is, first of all, they get souls, and if you're close enough to them, the light in their eyes appears to go out, which I noticed whilst making this video doesn't seem to happen should a necromancer still be controlling them. And that's about it. Now, you can journey further into the catacombs, but I wouldn't recommend it since there are more necromancers.